Long ago, in the land down under, there lived a little beast known as Pep-Bellington. Or as other... Yes.
Here's my banjo.
Yes, that's her, and her little banjo. But most call her Pep-Pel, the most feared of beasts.
I'm a scrapper.
Barely contained by mortal man.
That's me.
Feared by all.
And welcome back to Devlog. In the last part I worked on, and in this part I work on the hub level system, the system for organising and loading which level should be loaded, the visuals for the hub level, the restart level system, and any interactions based on the level loading that the player can perform. So, the organising of the level loading hub level. I'm a big fan of level select screens where you can actually walk around them and it's more a hub level in opposed to a boring level select screen. Level select screens are fine if you want something organised, but I think for a more fun game environment, a hub level is a bit more engaging for the player and also gives the player an opportunity to maybe perform some player inputs where it's not specifically in a level, and it could be in a more relaxing environment for a player to play around with the controls of the game. You can also add little secrets in the hub world. I wonder if there will be any secrets in my hub world. As you can probably tell from the visuals, the actual design of the hub world is very, very basic. And this is twofold. First fold, I haven't figured out what the actual hub world should be aside from the portals to different levels, and second fold, I would rather focus on level designs right now in opposed to the actual design of the hub world. But the current design of the hub world is you have the main levels above surface and then you have the hard mode at those levels below surface, so you'd have a point where you can go below the ground of each of the hub areas. Maybe if you've beaten one level and you've unlocked a hard mode level, you can go below ground, maybe to a sewer system of the levels, and you can play the hard mode of each of these levels. But for now, there is just the normal versions. The design for each of these hub worlds is pretty simple. We have the locked chest indicating if the devil is unlocked or locked. This is either going to be broken on the floor and replaced with the portal to the level if you have unlocked this level. If you have not unlocked this level, it's just going to be a cage that will display if the player can't go inside. We then have the text for the level. This is either going to be displaying the level name, or it is going to be displaying that you have to beat X number of levels in order to unlock this level. It will either say beat X number of levels if it's a normal level, or if it is a hard mode level, it will say you have to beat a specific level in order to unlock this level. So to unlock a hard mode, you just beat the regular mode of each of the levels and then you unlock the hard mode. Next we have what I have called in-game the death totems. These are stacks of bones and skulls that indicate roughly how many times you've died in the level. A new one of these will appear in the hub area next to the level for every 2 deaths you have in the level. The reason it's 2 deaths is because I don't want these to actually keep track of the amount of deaths of level, because there is a UI for this in the level. I mostly just wanted it to keep track of a rough estimate of how many times the player has died in these levels, just to give a funny little indicator of player death. The next thing is the pile of gemeralds. In opposed to just putting a boring UI number next to each level of how many gemeralds you have collected, I will either have a transparent cutout of a gemerald not being there to indicate that the player has not collected this one gemerald, or I will replace this with the actual gemerald that has been collected. So once you have collected all the gemeralds, you will have a stack of colourful gems, and if you haven't, you will have a stack of white plain objects. Next we have the visual indicating of which level this would be. The somehow laziest option I had was the one I actually like a lot, and I think it looks more visually interesting, which is just to arrange sprites from the level around the portal to the level. So each of the levels will have actual visuals from the level, taken from the level, placed around the hub portal to indicate what level it is going to go to. So, for example, the trash trail has a tree next to it, it has some logs, it has some pipes, it has grass scattered around. While still unfinished, the desert desert has some sand piling outside of it. This is to make it so the player actually knows what the level is going to be at a glance, in opposed to having to remember based on the names. The names are very indicative of what the level is. You're not going to confuse the name of the trash trail with the desert desert very easily, because one's a desert and one's a forest, in name alone. But visually it makes it more interesting, and the player can tell at a glance which level is which. Or, if the player hasn't played a level, it gives a brief preview of what the level is going to look like. An interesting fact about the visual design of this hub world is that I actually made a scripting for the lettering that the player can see for each of the hub worlds. Since these are sprites and not UI elements, I wanted these to animate in scene and also be walkable by the player, because I think visual UI that the player can move on is funny. But I also made a system for these to randomize in color through a set amount of pastel colors to make them more visually interesting and not statically designed, and also save me time in arranging each of the sprites for the level name, and also have an offset of their animations. Each of these has an animation for the letter moving up and then down again in a nice little pattern, but when there are multiple of these, I will set each of their offsets by 1 divided by the number of animators I currently have for this one sentence. So the trash trail has 10 letters. I sure hope it actually has 10 letters and I didn't miscount that. Each of these would have their animation offset slightly, so the first one would be 0, the second 0.1, the second 0.2, the third 0.3, so on and so forth, so that they have a wave pattern with their basic moving up and down movements. The next feature is the logic for if you have already played a level, or if you are partways through a level. This level needs to have a different menu appear when you enter the level. Let's say the player is partway through a level, but they want to reset and play from the beginning of a level for whatever reason. They could enter the level and just press the restart level button. More on that later. But this is extra loading and extra having the player stand there and then going through a menu and then resetting the level. So having an option for the player to just do this when loading into a level is a lot easier. Or the player could have already finished this level and want to go back and hunt for collectibles. The levels are quite large, so maybe the player doesn't want to play through the entire level to try and find the one section where there could be a collectible. They may want to load through a specific segment of the level. In this case, the player can choose to load the level and play through a specific checkpoint of the level. This is all pretty simple. All I do is if the player is partway through a level or they have beaten the level, I will enable a UI to appear when the player enters a portal, and I will delay loading into a level. This can either be the player continues on the level or resets the level, or if they have beaten the level, I will enable a second UI button they can interact with, which is a load from checkpoint button. Going through these in order, all that happens is the player will load the level to continue the level, so this is just normal loading, we'll load the level as normal. To restart the level, I will take the save function and I will just reset the player's current checkpoint and chunk index that they are going to be loaded into when starting the level, and I will also reset the level's playtime. Next, I have having the player being able to play from a specific checkpoint of the level. This is also very simple. I will just reset the player's current chunk and respawn point to whatever the current one is when we are selecting this button. When also highlighting this button, you can press left and right on the control stick or your movement input to cycle through the different checkpoints. This will then cycle through a selection of UI visuals, being little postcards of each chunk, and will also display an area number for which area you are loading into, so you can get a visual of what part of the level you are loading into, and also have the text to display at what point of the level this would be, if you are not overly familiar with the visuals of the levels. I'm also debating adding a visual for the amount of collectibles in this specific chunk, as well as the amount of collectibles in this chunk that have been collected, but I feel like maybe that would ruin the fun of having to hunt down and find collectibles if I'm just going to tell the player which specific chunk they are currently in that the player would need to hunt for, as well as the fact that the UI visuals for collectibles does display the current collectible and then the preceding collectible if it has been collected. So I feel like through that the player can reasonably deduce which collectible they are still requiring and where its position would be in the level without me having to specify which chunk specifically the collectible is in, especially because some chunks can be very small, so it could very easily remove any difficulty with finding collectibles if I am specifying to this extent where a collectible may be. Another interesting thing with starting a level from a specific checkpoint is the player's level time. Obviously, since levels have to be beaten in a specific amount of time if you want to impress your good friends, there could be issues with players loading into a level and then having a superior level beaten time because they have loaded into a further on section of the level which may have sped up their playtime. What I do for this is I will calculate what the player's playtime should be based on each chunk. This is pretty simple. I will just dictate that each chunk should take 1 minute to complete. This is far over exceeding the amount of time it actually takes to complete one chunk. For example, there are around 22 chunks in the Trash Trail level and it takes me around 80 minutes to beat the level, so 1 minute per chunk is far greater than is going to be seen in the level. And then if the player's current playtime is below this amount, I will increase the player's playtime to this amount so the player cannot reach for a very broken high score if they are already loading from a checkpoint of a level. Obviously, another thing I could do is just enable level time if the player is loading from a checkpoint, but I found it easier just to manipulate the level time to be larger than it should be if the player is loading into a level. Finally, we have the option for restarting a level when already within a level. This is very fun, and I'm pretty sure I've already talked about this in a previous devlog. All this does from a logic standpoint is it does the same thing from if we are restarting a level from the level loading system in the hub screen. What this does is it just resets the player's level chunk, level respawn index, and also the player's level time, and then to make it easier to respawn the player, I kill them. One option for this could have just been transitioning the screen and then moving the player back to spawn, but killing the player does this already, and resetting the chunk index and respawn index also sets the player back to 0, and doing this also resets player time. So just killing the player made it significantly easier than actually programming anything complex for having the player be respawned back at the beginning of a level. And that's it for devlog. The hub area was not what I was originally going to make the devlog about, but I had remembered that I had never actually discussed any information about the hub world or hub world logic in a devlog. So I pivoted from the funny devlog, where you were all going to get a fun pizza party, into this devlog instead about hub world logic. Next devlog is the fun pizza party devlog.